I will record.
Hey, there it goes.
There you go.
Yay.
Anyone who doesn't like it can leave. I like it gives you that option. All right,
Uh-oh.
so I am hopefully sharing my screen now.
You are.
Okay,
You are.
great.
You can see it.
All right, excellent. So you see my full presentation. There's nothing on my screen blocking it that I need to move. Okay, all right, great. Well, thank you all for your time. I'm gonna give a viewpoint into the Bull Run Mountains and why we should save it from my perspective. So there's a lot of non-governmental and governmental organizations as well with a lot of individuals that are working within the Bull Run Mountains, whether it's on conservation or research, volunteer projects, etc. I'm not going to highlight everything. We have a lot going on. Mike only gave me so much time, so I'm going to give you my introduction from my point of view. And so it's going to be very Virginia Outdoors Foundation heavy and the work we're doing here at the preserve. And that's just because that's what I know best. That's what I have access to. But I'm not doing that intentionally. I'm just giving that, and hopefully we can hang our hat and build around that, whether it's through VOF, PEC, or any other organizations that do work in our area. So just moving in with that to the space, I think we're all quite experts here on the geography, but just from my perspective, you have Washington, D.C., the large star off to the right, and you have this 66 travel corridor coming southwest out from it to Bull Run Mountains. And so that's the first red splotch you see there on your map. And what we have highlighted here is the Bull Run Mountains Natural Area Preserve, Sky Meadow State Park, and Shenandoah. And there are a lot of other natural areas within this region. So we're not trying to dismiss those properties, but one reoccurring theme that we see with the surrounding populace is they're looking to get to mountainous public access areas. So this is really just to point out that we're the first mountainous access point coming out of DC. And so there's 2.5 million population just in Northern Virginia and those suburbs surrounding DC. Then we have the DC population and the Southern Maryland on top of that. And one surprising thing that a lot of folks wouldn't think of at the preserve, but we see a lot of weekly, is because we have this very close proximity to the Dulles International Airport, there are a surprising amount of international visitors coming out to the preserve. They have a one-day, half-day layover and they want to get out for a hike. They Google and they get out to us. But I've hosted people out randomly on the preserve who are from Puerto Rico, from different countries in Africa, Australia, Europe, and I'm always surprised by who's stopping by. So a surprising international reach here in Northern Virginia. And so zooming into this, here is a map of the area. So you'll see on the northern topmost end, you'll see the Audie Mill just below Route 50. The Gaines Mill is in the middle of this Bull Run project area. And then at the very bottom, right just above Route 66 and Thoroughfare Gap, is the Chapman Beverly Mill. So we have these historic mills structuring both ends and the middle of this project area. And this is just to give a little view into the 12,500 acre project area as we currently define it. And I want to point out a little bit of error here, that the southernmost red boundary of the project area should extend below south below 66. And there's some good work going on Biscuit Mountain there with the Arlington Outdoor Lab. So we'll need to expand that map. But for now, this shows a lot of the easements, both under VOF, PEC, and other land trusts and governmental organizations. And the light orange, you see what is the 2,500 acres of the preserve. And at any point, if anyone has any questions or wants to bring up any points, you're welcome to chime in. How I present this is we really at Bull Run Mountains have diversity down to the very bedrock. And so on the left-hand side, you see this geological map and you see these overlapping layers. And we have a lot of very unique features from different time periods. And on the right-hand side, I'm not really going to get in the details of anything, much less this, but this is just a diagram that shows the Rift Basin here. So millions of years ago, as Africa and the North American continent pulled apart, it created this Rift Valley. And if it torn at a different point, Bull Run Mountains would be very much a coastal city or a coastal mountain overlooking the ocean. But it tore a different way. And we have DC, Piedmont, and the coastal plains off over to our east. And this geology just really creates a very, very unique bedrock for the rest of the diversity that you see built atop it. And a lot of, the average person hiking through the preserve would notice right away that the mountaintops have all these chestnut oak trees. The lowlands have beech trees, poplar trees, and there's different habitats. But anyone who's kind of a little bit more versed in ecology or botany would actually come to understand that there's 11 different distinct and unique plant communities throughout just the preserve on the Bull Run Mountains. And that really provides a rich substrate for a lot of different faunal and floral diversity to be built atop of. And then in addition to that, we have a quite uniquely diversely peopled past. We have the Bull Runs has been historically a sanctuary for marginalized and oppressed in our area. The First Nation peoples that escaped their fate along the Trail of Tears. The Underground Railroad passed right through one of our gaps, and that really provided access to a lot of free Blacks pre-Civil War and then emancipated African Americans to escape and find respite here or set up here after the emancipation. And then finally, in all of the areas that weren't really anchored down by industry, there were a lot of immigrant and marginalized white populations living here as well. In addition to a lot of historical figures and some of the social elite of the day. And just moving on, unfortunately with colonial expansion within the Americas, our tribal people were pushed out very early on into the colonialization process. So we have a hard time finding very direct representation today, but I just want to point out that this is native land and this is tribal lands of the Manahoac people, which were of Sioux stock. And I just want to point that out moving forward. And we're working as hard as we can to connect and represent with who would be the closest representation for those peoples nowadays. And with that, Bull Run Mountains, first and foremost, I know Leslie loved this story of, it's a story of hope in the mountain. And this picture here was taken by Gary Fleming. He's the vegetative ecologist for DCR. And this is a pale corydalis or a bleeding heart. And this plant, up until this photo, was not seen in the Bull Run Mountain for about 80 years. In the 1930s is the last time that it was noted by Henry Allard, who was a Smithsonian botanist who would come out into weekend forays in the 1930s and do botanizing. And he noted the plant, and then no other scientist or person ever witnessed or recorded this plant since that. And due to a fire that happened on top of High Point, and then a lot of restoration efforts, for the first time this popped up in the mid 2000s, 2010, 11. And so I think the mountain holds a lot more surprises than just this corydalis, but this is a good token species for our conservation efforts here. So just zooming in more to the preserve and how we look at it, this is very much a core and corridor for the rest of the conservation efforts underway by folks. And this preserve has been a preserve since 2002. So this landholding has been a preserve. It's roughly 2,500 acres currently, and it's one of 66 other natural area preserves protected by DCR's Division of Natural Heritage. And, a preserve is a very intense form of dedication within the state. It's the highest form of conservation we can allocate land here in Virginia. So it's not just any wilderness tract that can be saved. You actually have to have a strong justification in natural and cultural holdings, unique and rare, that would need this form of protection. So this is a very notable accolade for land to be able to get such a designation. And so what does a preserve really mean? For us, VOF treats it as a living laboratory and an open air museum. And what this really means to me is that this is a public space that is an intellectual and spiritual resource. So we do have a trail system. The public is invited and welcome to come explore it, but we don't try to put recreational activity at the foremost. We're here for a lot of other reasons. And so we think that this is a great place where people can come explore our trail systems and discover and connect with place. And really, that is our goal, is connect people to the uniqueness of this place. And we do that through art, history, and science, but we also try to renew and improve our community members' ecological and societal awareness, increase their mindfulness, and increase their connection to community through this space. A preserve tries to underline habitat as a home. And so there's a lot of conversation in the conservation world about ecosystem services and critical habitat for keystone species. But we really tried to hold up and convey that these 11 distinct plant communities are home to a variety of species. So when visitors are coming in and interacting with plants and animals within the preserve, we try to put it up that they're coming into their home and interacting with them, even though this is a community resource. And people are very much built on the same home, and our cultural history program delves into that. And so I'm just passing through here some hopefully great photos of preserve inhabitants, just kind of showing a little bit of our natural diversity here. And one of the programs that we've been building over time is our science and research program. A lot of science and research is kind of put forth to the community that they serve as kind of an inhuman cold process. And we try to get community members involved with our science, involved with their research. We have a very robust community science program. Anytime we do archaeology, we invite the public into that process. And we really believe that knowledge and understanding are essential for empathy, and empathy is essential for our survival with all of our fates intertwined. And so the spider was chosen very specifically because a lot of people are afraid of our snakes, our timber rattlesnakes and spiders. And we're trying to convey a greater empathy and understanding for all of our creatures here. And so just to highlight some of our scientific research and programs, we have a really exciting project with Virginia Tech researchers. Ben Kligman is here with Summers Cleary looking at some of our waterfall formation. And there's an amazing plethora of plant fossils, invertebrate fossils, fish, coelacanths, and other animals that we're actually pulling from this Jurassic-Triassic deposit. So we're looking at our ecosystem 200 million years ago. And this is a really, really exciting discovery because this is the first time since the 1950s that anything has been published from these formations in Virginia. And the previous publications were just noting that fossils were there, but there was no investigation into what was there. So we've actually been doing some pretty heavy work over the last few years to be able to tell the story of what our ecosystem looked like 200 million years ago. And on top of that, we have a cultural history program, and I'm not going to be able to mention everyone, but we're looking into our First Nations people, our different populations from the 1700s onward. And you can see Patrick O'Neill standing in lush ferns below the Quorum House. And he's been working with us and the Archaeological Society of Virginia to fully survey all of our cultural history sites throughout the preserve, and hopefully eventually further outside of the boundaries as well. We have Dan Pizzoni looking into early First Tribe Native American sites, and there he is on the lower left-hand corner investigating this odd stone stack structure that he believes might be part of a ritual site. We have a lot of stone cutting implements, cemeteries, obelisks that are part of it, and I'd be happy to speak more about it at another point or have you all out to the preserve to participate in some of it. We also have a lot of natural history research. We have folks from the Smithsonian taking recordings, and we're building a whole sound library of all the frogs, the birds, the animals that make noise, recorded right here in the Bull Run Mountains, and that's Jacob Saucier that is doing that. We have a lot of entomological research from several different researchers. Timber rattlesnakes and Marty Martin has been he's been having ongoing research here for decades. And one of the things that we're most proud about, and is a recent invention for us, is our fellowship program. And this is something where we invite young career professionals to come out and expand their resumes in ways that is most conducive for the careers that they want to have in their future. And so they really work with us to develop a project and take leadership over it. And so far we've had Baronale Dubé, and she was our Black History Fellow. Currently, we have Lauren Fuchs, who is our Snake Research Fellow, and we have Meredith Hart, who was our Insect Biodiversity Fellow. So this fellowship program we're now on our second year, and we've also had a special team of Dawson Project fellows and interns that we created for a project that I'll talk more about. But Kellen Hope there on the left, she inventoried Jack Dawson's entire house with all of his contents. And Miguel Montalvo, he took pictures of the house as it sat when Jack Dawson last lived in it. And they're beautiful, evocative, artful photos. I wish I could share some of them today, but I'm pressed for time, so we'll keep going. And then Annie Mickham was collecting oral history interviews from locals of those who knew Jack Dawson. And so we're trying to recreate Bull Run Mountain local Jack Dawson's life here on the mountain through his home site and through the words of those who knew him.
Just 1 second, Joe. Does everyone here know who Jack Dawson is, or does anybody not?
It was at 2 no's. It was at the same time.
This is right.
I don't.
I think it's right. We're new to the history here.
Okay.
Yeah, can you just say a word?
Yeah, I have a slide on Jack Dawson coming up, so we'll hit that very shortly. And this ties into Jack Dawson because it's actually the photo with the instruments is looking off in the direction on the north section of Jack's property. So he knew this little shed quite well, I'm sure. And our artistic fellowships that we're working on right now is we found these folk lyrics from the work progress administration efforts in the 1930s. And there was a woman named Susan Morton, and she had many forays into the mountain from Haymarket and collected lyrics, hearing them live being sung at different homestead sites. And so we're looking to hire a musician, a set of musicians to help us recreate those traditional folk songs and what they might have sounded like. And we're also trying to develop a fellowship to create a podcast to talk about some of the work that we do here at the Preserve. Ones that would be conducive to that kind of format, such as, Jacob's Bird Sound or this music fellowship. And now that we get into folk history, we'll hit Jack Dawson through this little tour. But a Diversely People Past, we have a whole suite of homestead ruins and cemetery ruins that help us tell this story. This past Thanksgiving, Leslie, myself, and a team of VOF volunteers went out searching for a certain homestead site that was tied to George Washington and a woman that's only known as Old Mother Leathercoat. And so many of you might know that George Washington, when he was a young boy, he was known as a boy surveyor because he got into surveying very early. And Lord Fairfax actually gave him one of his first surveying jobs, surveying the Bull Run Mountains. And so Washington talks about his time here in the Bull Run Mountains. And right there at Thoroughfare Gap, there is a peak that's called Old Mother Leathercoat Mountain. And George Washington actually named this after a person that gave him room and board while he was there. So there's this folkloric tales floating around of this older Black woman that was just called Old Mother Leathercoat after her old leather coat that she wore regardless of season. And so she was set up there right at the gap. And so Leslie, myself, and a team of volunteers went out trying to find sites that could have been her likely cabin site. And so there's a little blip in history of us trying to do our own surveying and catch up with this folkloric figure. So a lot of the stories on Bull Run Mountains, we're still trying to figure out, if this was a real person, which in this case, I believe that it is, but if we can nail down a specific identity to who Old Mother Leathercoat was. And moving into that, George Washington and many other historical figures kind of pass in and out of our stories here, but we have set up our history program into one called Making His Story Our Story, where we're trying to get into the folk stories of the entire peoples that lived at the mountain. And here's just a map of our north and south section and our different cultural sites and cemeteries found within the preserve boundaries. And there are actually a few that I see we need to add to it. We've been making some progress and finding new sites as well recently. And one of the most exciting things about our work is we've been researching all these different families and individuals, and through archives and, you know, doing different surveys of their home sites and their cemetery sites. And we've had like the resounding success, I'll say, of actually being able to find tying names to unmarked graves and working down to connecting with direct descendants of these people who are living in this area, and being able to welcome them back out to their home site. And so here are just some photos of some of those descendants who have made it out to us and have shared what they know about their history, and they're working directly with us to help build and save their history, and also share it with the communities that we serve. And there's a lot of great information. One of my favorite pictures here is just the lantern off to the bottom right. That was a lantern that was used in the homestead site of one of the quorums, and it was brought home for one of our Black History walks that we had recently. Another local that has done a lot of work previously in 2003 with both VOF and PEC, a fellow by the name of Howard Thompson, took on this project to digital technology and iPhones. He went out and wrote down coordinates of all the different cemeteries throughout the Bull Run Mountains. And so we've tried to build upon this work and digitize it for our modern purposes. But here's this digitized map, and you can see that he spent substantial time walking transects throughout the mountain. And so we're trying to not reinvent the wheel, but very much build on a lot of community members who have put in work over the years. And here's just a great photo that shows the diversity of cemetery sites and homesteads. You have the most opulent cemetery on the preserve being the Chapman Beverly Cemetery here on the left-hand side, and then the Dawson Cemetery in the middle. And then most of the graves here on the mountain are what you see on the right, and they're unmarked field stones just turned upright. And I think that's a great example for most of our sites, because we don't have names we're working with in a lot of the cases. So we actually have to somehow tie the site and archival information overlapping in a way that we can confirm identities. And it's not possible in all cases, but it's been possible in many cases, much to my personal surprise. One of my favorite stories here is Liza's Secret. And this is this folklore tale of this woman who felled trees better than any man, shot wildcats with more accuracy than anyone else on the mountain. She took care of her entire community, and she also allegedly murdered her husband because he was very unkind to her and the community. And so that would be her secret. And it's an interesting story. And you see this little circle down on the back end of the south section. And we know all stories are reporting her homestead site to be from there, but we're still trying to tease out, was she a real specific individual, or was she more of an amalgamation of just strong Bull Run Mountains women?
What was her name?
Her name is Liza's Secret. And we have a few different candidates, but one actually lives right in that circle. And that circle, what we know now, what that we didn't know a few years ago, is we've been reconstructing this African-American neighborhood there. And so after the emancipation, a lot of African-American males were renting and then eventually going on to buy properties back there to quarry stone out of and make their living pulling stone out of the mountain and offering it for folks to make their stone buildings in the area. And there was
And Joe, just for reference for people, this is like at the end of High Point Lane, basically. Is that, or where just to give a little, is that right or not?
It is right. We're between High Point Lane and Mountain Road. And I know Mountain Road goes through a lot of different areas, but one part of it comes back to the back of the south section. It's squeezed right in between there. And there's two different candidates for, there's two different folks down there. One was actually Mosby's ranger after the war that set up back there. And then there was a widow with 8 children, Elizabeth Payne. And we actually think Elizabeth Payne could be a candidate for Liz. We're trying to figure out why her husband wasn't around and why she was widowed. But that is one lead. And it's interesting that this is almost an entirely Black neighborhood right after the emancipation, except for Elizabeth Payne and this Mosby's Ranger. So it was a very interesting neighborhood, a lot of complex social ties in that area. But Liza Secret is one of these folklore characters that we would definitely like to peg down to an individual, if it is an individual. And then here's our man, Jack Dawson. So here's a picture of Jack Dawson himself. And he's a very idiosyncratic character and also a anachronistic character. And so what makes him so interesting is he was born in the house that he lived in up until he died in his 90s. And he did not have indoor plumbing during a time where most of his neighbors here on the north section. So he's right below the L&J, I shouldn't say right below, but he's below L&J property. And there's 19 acres of land that is family owned that he never owned, but he was given permission or rights to live in until he passed away. But he was what we kind of identify as one of the last mountain men. So he never owned a vehicle, and many folks that we collect oral history from knew him because they would pick him up and give him rides to the grocery store, because otherwise he would walk to Marshall or to Middleburg Safeway, or he would ride a tractor. I've also heard that he did when the road was still opened up. And he lived off the land very much. He had a little garden here. He's seen collecting walnuts, and he's just a very interesting character. So this is the house that we were spending all this time to try to get to know Jack Dawson retroactively. And he was one of the informants for Dr. Susan Leopold's dissertation on ethnobotany of the Bull Run Mountains. So he was very much connected to the way that people in the 1800s would have lived within the Bull Run Mountains. And so he's very much a connection to our past. And so his story is a story of the Bull Run Mountains, because Leslie and others have actually traced the Dawson family from our southern section, where you have this William Dawson gravesite in the mid 1800s, and traced them through a few different homestead sites, moving north to where he actually ended up in the northernmost section of the preserve, just over the boundary line, in truth. And there's his homestead site and how it looks today.
Well, even in my 30 years here, I remember when he used to come walking up, starting to go up towards Ray's house on that hill there. I remember he was going to a funeral one time, and his tie was, about as wide as 6 inches. But his sister actually lived in the Gregg house, which is the brick house that Claude Schock moved. So his sister lived there, and she had taught at the little school in Landmark that no longer exists. So they, the whole Landmark history fascinates me too. But he would walk down to have. He lives up above, what's their name? Catherine Jameson. Do you know the Jamesons at all, Ray?
No, I don't think so.
If you go the dirt part of Bull Run Mountain Road, that you go up a dirt road there, and they were his neighbors. But anyway, it's fascinating that he was around when I was around.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so Karina, we're definitely going to have to get you and anyone else on oral histories. We're still collecting oral histories, and one of the neighbors here I just ran into the other day told me a story about Jack, that they gave him a TV at one point, and they were helping him in his older age, bringing him food. They brought him a refrigerator, and he called him and cussed him out and said, "You need to get this thing out of here because it's eating up all my electricity. Every time I open it, the light's on. So I don't want it anymore." And they also gave him a TV, and he did not like politics or politicians, and he had hearing issues. And so the neighbors, when they would come through Hungry Run, which is the road off of Bull Run Mountain Road that I'm living back here, and where Jameson lives and where Jack lived, they would hear him cussing about everything that they're hearing on the news, and they would call it that sweet mountain music, because Jack had a unique dialect, and he definitely projected quite a bit. So yeah, we're still collecting stories, and we're working on writing a book right now that will have all of the images of his house and share some of the oral histories and present Jack's very anachronistic, idiosyncratic life that really connects our present to our past here at the Bull Run Mountains, at least. And I
know Dean did an oral history, and Ray, do you happen to know the Greggs? Mr. Gregg that worked at the bank for years and years? and he takes care of the little cemetery across from us. That was his nephew.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know him.
Yeah.
So that's our man, Jack Dawson.
Okay.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away in 2011, if I'm recalling correctly.
Okay.
Mhm.
Which Dawson headstone are we looking at here?
So that is William Dawson, who is direct family lineage to Jack
Okay.
earlier on. So when the Dawsons first came here, they started at the south section, and then they skipped homestead sites, eventually landing up in the north section where Jack Dawson's house still stands to this day.
Okay.
And this would be the house that he was born in as well. So,
And who owns that house now? I heard there was family arguments over the whole thing, or have you guys been able to get a hold of that at all, or are you trying?
so we went through and inventoried the house, and we're working with the current owner to save it, because were wondering what to do with it. And Leslie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's going to be slated to be donated to become part of the preserve, and his house will help be an interpretive folk history center. We'll try to keep it as it was and be able to tell Jack's story. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Leslie? Just about, I don't know what I should say or not say there, but
Yeah.
or if you have any
Well,
updates.
actually, back to the gravestone question, that gravestone of William Dawson, which you can see is from, he passed right before the Civil War. That would be Jack Dawson's great grandfather. And the interesting thing is that a number of generations and Dawsons just stay in the Bull Run Mountains, and we've been trying to figure out how they moved, but we've now got a pretty good track on a lot of family members and they kind of made their way north, if you want to call it, from the south section of the preserve to the north section. And then Jack was the last one, the last Dawson, still living. But we're starting pre-Civil War, and Jack Dawson is there until 2012, 2011.
Mhm. And so moving on from Jack, we have 3 different sections of the preserve, just to give you all insight into how we at VOF view this land holding. And we have the north section, Jackson Hollow, and the south section. And I'm just going to highlight some of the beauty of some of the sites, and hopefully I can get you all out in person at any point to hike around and see it firsthand. But here's an aerial shot of our north section, zooming into that stone house. This is a home that the Creoles last lived in, and it's been historically renovated, and we're currently working on it further so that it can be the home of our physical collection. So we have a lot of archaeological and historical collections that we want to set up in this space to make available for researchers and members of the public. In addition to this, we do have 7 miles of trails that we use as a facilitated hiking. So this isn't open to the public, but we try to get as many school groups and individuals out here as much as possible. But this kind of more facilitated access allows us to actually keep the quality of the habitat much more improved than open access would. And the next section, Jackson Hollow, we're coming south. So Jack Dawson was the most north section. Now we're in Jackson Hollow, which is the center. This was the old lake site that was once here. So there was a man-made dammed up lake here in the 40s, 50s, up until 1972 when Hurricane Agnes blew out the lake. So people would come out here to fish, to hunt, to camp up until that point. And then when the dam was blown out, the Corps of Engineers got involved and said, you can totally rebuild the dam, but you have to pay us to do it right this time around. And the owner said, yep, that's not happening. And reportedly, it became a site where bikers in the 70s and different countercultures like hippies would come out and party and have concerts. And I know that from the owners, the Beckers, who came out for one of those parties in the 70s and asked the owner if they could live there, in which they did up until just a year or two before I got here. And I actually had them back out to the site, and that was lovely. But we've renovated this building site at this point, and it is now our center. We call it our research outpost so that we can house visiting researchers, and it really kind of gets partners out there and positions them for free so that they can do research without incurring any kind of additional expense. But because of the 2 steep ridges and this very wet old lake bed, this is very much a biodiversity hotspot and really helps us underline the living laboratory value of this property. There are a lot of species found here that are found nowhere else within Northern Virginia. And it is also the site of Cat Harpin Creek, where we're putting in our brook trout. So we're reintroducing brook trout to the area. This has been a really successful program. We've been working with Trout in the Classroom program. So this is like a consortium of public and private schools that have helped us do this work. And I was really skeptical at the beginning, but there are summer surviving trout every year still in the stream, and they're making it. So this makes it the closest thriving population to Washington, D.C. that isn't being, put into fish specifically every year. And you can see some of the, that this isn't just good for the habitat and the animals and the trout, but also great for people. It really has helped us build ties with public and private schools in the area. And we have kids as young as preschool raising these trout in their classroom and releasing them into the stream. And it's adorable. Every once in a while, I'll send a picture when I can catch one and say, your trout's doing well. And there's a hooray email back. They're so excited because they're like their little babies when they're putting them into the stream. And then we also.
What stream is this?
This is Cat Harpin Creek.
Okay.
And so this is the only stream that we identified as being able to sustain trout year round. Most of our streams were good enough, pristine quality wise, but some of them got a little too hot in the summer. But there's so many spring heads flowing into this little steep mountain range that it stays easily cool enough year round here. And one of the exciting things, not just from getting kids out there, but many of the high school students have actually authored abstracts with us and presented presentations, leading the presentation at scientific conferences about the work that we're doing. So it's really much a young scientists in training project, from kindergarten up to high school. And moving on from there.
Whoever's doing the like oral history on Jackson Hollow, you got to talk to my husband Dean, because he used to talk to us about it. Well, he still talks about it all the time. That's where they went swimming, and he doesn't describe it as a man-made lake. He describes it as a round swimming pool that got deeper in the middle, and I guess he thinks it was cement with sand on top of it, and there no fishing and boating in his day.
He is correct. So actually the lake was up right there. And then if you come kind of like top right out of the screen, there is a swimming pool in between the lake and the campground. And it was such an elaborate swimming pool. I've actually had folks out there that remember being kids swimming in the pool. And I was thinking just like a little in-ground pool, but it was like, it had fake sand and a beach, and it had like an island in the middle and all of this stuff. But we definitely have to talk to Dean.
Very impressive to little farm boy every summer.
I bet. And then just ending with our south section, this is our ambassador site. So this is the platform for the public. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they're able to come down and interact with the mountain, with the preserve at their own pace. We have 7 miles of trail system here. And this is what we're probably most known for to the bulk of Northern Virginia, is the south section as the preserve hiking area. And so here's a map of it as it currently stands, the trail system. And I just wanted to highlight during this presentation that we're building our capacity. We've been building a lot of capacity in the recent years here at the preserve, but we're increasing our trail system and bringing folks to some of our cultural sites that previously were not on our trail system. And it gives a more full, complete look at the history of the preserve, because some of the stories that were not being featured tied into some of our diverse populations, and we're working with those descendant communities of how to present that story. But in addition to increased trails, increased access to cultural history, we're also putting in a access site where we'll have parking, and we'll have a more how should I say this, an easier loop for children and the elderly that's flat, so they don't have to cross the railroad tracks. And so this really will just improve the environment and make this more of a community resource for us with this implementation. And we're hoping to begin that process this year. So we have this little 4-acre parcel that was set aside from the very beginning that we could develop to create these kind of facility resources for folks.
So Joe, are any of those trails open for biking or horses? Are they just foot trails?
So these are foot trails only. And so any trails that are on the preserve, whether it's on our south section or otherwise, one of the many restrictions through being a natural area preserve is that certain traffic is closed. So we don't have bike riding, we don't have horseback riding, we don't allow dogs into the preserve, we don't allow mountain climbing. So most preserves are actually not even open to the public unless there's a guide with them at all. And so we really see it as important to get people into the site, but yeah, there are restricted activities here. So it's basically foot travel only, humans only too.
And how many acres is the south parcel in total?
About 800 acres.
Wow, okay, cool.
And so we're just ending it there. We're at the end of the presentation, but this was really our spiel for, trying to get everyone excited and also seeing the preserve from Virginia Outdoors perspective. And we don't limit ourselves to what's within the preserve. We like to think of the whole Bull Run Mountains, but obviously we have the most direct control over what's within this preserve boundary. And so just ending it with some folks enjoying the preserve here. This past spring, just a couple weeks ago, we had a team of Smithsonian social media folks and herpetologists come out for our big spotted salamander migration. And we don't limit this Jackson Hollow access just to scientists, but we also bring local kids out. So this is a fellow named Shane enjoying his first spotted salamander out at Bull Run Mountains, and it was a really exciting moment for him. And then here's a group of Mountainside Montessori school kids with a black bear track that they're investigating. Here's some kids enjoying Jackson Hollow again, netting some bugs with our fellow Meredith Hart and learning about dragonflies. And this is one of my favorite pictures. And this is Leslie with Ann Washington. And Ann Washington came out to the homestead site in which she was born and grew up that we worked to preserve with the Bull Run Fund, if I'm not mistaken. That was a project, our 10-acre quorum acquisition.
That's right.
And we were walking with her, and this was her first time back out at the preserve since 1960 when she left. And so, Leslie and I were brimming with questions and so excited to have her there. But she was telling us a story on the way back up about a time she dropped her toy into her bed pot and got in so much trouble. And when we were walking by, Leslie scooped up this bucket, and Ann lit up and said, "That's the pot right there." So we found Ann Washington's childhood bed pot that day, and we're obviously very excited by the prospect.
That's hilarious.
And so just to end this presentation, one of the things that kind of has transformed out of our hikes, and we're, I hesitate to just lay facts out on folks and tell, everyone when they come out with this, what species is what, who was here, what their name was, what date they were here. We kind of want to just, prick people, excite people about their own place in the world and about their own histories and their own connection with the earth. And one of the things that we like to ask people, especially with our cultural history hikes, is what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Because all of these folks that we're researching, I think that many of them would probably be tickled and amazed that there's a team of folks researching so eagerly about their life and sharing their story, their challenges, their triumphs, and using that as a way to connect people in the present to the past. And so one thing we try to offer or challenge people to is ask themselves, whether you feel relevant or not to your current community, you need to make a decision of what kind of ancestor do you want to be. And so I will end with that. And if that didn't excite you to save the Bull Run Mountains, I just say do it for this little musk turtle, because if that's not the cutest little guy that you've ever seen, I don't know how to get you excited. And that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Joe.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I had no idea that that much was going on, particularly as far as getting the children out to get their toes in the mud and actually hold an amphibian. You know, when so many species of amphibians are endangered, threatened now, to get the children connected to nature and wildlife in a personal way, it's extraordinarily important.
Absolutely, Ray. And you'll notice Shane there has the little blue gloves on. So we're teaching them proper practices and making sure they're not hurting their sensitive skin. But a lot of excitement that night.
That's
Sure.
awesome. That is, as you said, Joe, that's a fantastic overview. If we aren't excited now to get out, nothing will. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.